The villains in the Indiana Jones franchise are as iconic as the artifacts they seek. These super evil bad guys, driven by greed, power, and ambition, challenge Indiana Jones in ways that highlight his heroism. In fact, these are the guys who make Indy who he is, because a hero is only as good as the villain he defeats. People like Renee Bellik and Walter Donovan use intellect to outwit him, while brute forces like the German mechanic emphasize raw physicality. Then we have the likes of Mola Ram, who drove entire movies on their shoulders while giving Indiana Jones the worst time of his life. Whether motivated by fame, fortune, or ideology, Indiana Jones villains represent the darker side of humanity's desire for control over history. And in this video, we will explore 12 such purely evil villains. Let's begin, shall we? Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
You will become a true believer.
Mola Ram. Mola Ram is by far one of the greatest villains that Indiana Jones has had to face, because this guy embodies power-hungry ambition and religious fanaticism to terrifying extremes. A member of the Thuggee cult, and a devout worshipper of Kali, the Hindu goddess of death, Mola Ram aims to dominate the world in her name. After the British supposedly wiped out the Thuggee cult, Mola Ram took charge, becoming the high priest and leader of the surviving members. His ambition was to exterminate the British, eliminate other religions, and rule all under Kali's shadow. Mola Ram found a powerful ally in Chhatarlal, the prime minister of Pankot Palace, and together they manipulated their young heir to the throne, Zalim, by poisoning his father, Maharaja Premjit Singh, in 1930. They then brainwashed the boy, turning him into their puppet. But the real horror began when Mola Ram took possession of the 3 Sankara stones, powerful sacred relics, and kidnapped a village's children to use them as slaves. These children were forced to search for the last 2 Sankara stones, and help Mola Ram collect precious gems. His thirst for power didn't stop there. Soon, Indiana Jones, Willie Scott, and Short Round stumbled upon the village Mola Ram had devastated. They set out to Pankot Palace to retrieve the stolen Sankara stones and rescue the kidnapped children. Upon arriving, Indiana Jones quickly deduced that the palace was a hub for Thuggee activities. His suspicions were confirmed when he witnessed a ritual where Mola Ram tore a man's heart out in front of a cheering crowd and lowered the victim into a pit of lava. At this point, Mola Ram's sadism was impossible to ignore. This was no ordinary villain. This was a man who enjoyed inflicting pain. When Indiana and his friends were captured, Mola Ram revealed his ultimate goals. He forced Indiana to drink the blood of Kali, turning him into an unwilling follower, and enslaved Short Round along with the other children. Mola Ram even attempted to sacrifice Willie Scott to Kali, but thanks to Short Round, they escaped. In a fight for survival, Indiana Jones faced off against Mola Ram, but the villain slipped away down a trapdoor, only to be confronted again later on a precarious bridge. Mola Ram laughed off Indiana's threat to destroy the Sankara stones, but his confidence came crashing down when Indy destroyed the bridge's rope, sending most of Mola Ram's men into a river of hungry crocodiles. The villain fought back, clinging to the edge of the bridge, but his end came when Indiana used the power of the Sankara stones against him. Mola Ram's hand was burned by a firestone before he was fed to the crocodiles. Despite Mola Ram's death, the British never confirmed it, due to the lack of remains. After all, who's going to find evidence of someone eaten alive by crocodiles? Nonetheless, rumors spread that his ghost haunted the ruins of the flooded Temple of Doom, scaring off any who dared approach. Chhatarlal managed to escape with some treasure, but the British kept a close eye on him, ensuring he wouldn't try to resurrect Mola Ram's horrific temple. Mola Ram's character is the embodiment of pure villainy. He's sadistic, genocidal, and completely heartless, thriving on the suffering of others. His devotion to Kali is just a mask for his insatiable lust for power. He doesn't care who he sacrifices, whether it's innocent villagers, children, or even his own allies. The world was his chessboard, and everyone was a pawn to be discarded once they served their purpose. Mola Ram's portrayal by Amrish Puri is nothing short of iconic, making him one of the most unforgettable villains in film history. Late Mr. Puri was a veteran Indian actor and has delivered innumerable performances across several roles, mostly villainous.
I'll tell you everything.
Yes.
Major Arnold Tote. Tote, the sinister Nazi agent in Raiders of the Lost Ark, is a villain you love to hate. Cold, calculating, and oozing malice. He was more than a bureaucratic cog in Hitler's machinery. He's a sadistic operative who revels in intimidation and violence, leaving a trail of terror wherever he goes. Tasked by the Third Reich's Special Antiquities Collection to retrieve the headpiece of the Staff of Ra, Tote's mission takes him to Nepal, where he crosses paths with Indiana Jones and Marion Ravenwood. Things predictably go south. In a snowy Nepalese bar, Tote storms in with his hired muscle, but his confidence takes a fiery hit when, during a chaotic brawl, he attempts to grab the red-hot headpiece from the floor. The result? A hilariously painful handburn that sends him screaming into the snow. This moment is classic Tote, arrogant and overconfident, but comically humbled by his own carelessness. The Nazis later used the scar on his palm to create a half-baked replica of the artifact, but the missing details doom their efforts to locate the Ark's true resting place. In Cairo, he joins Colonel Dietrich, Renee Bellik, and the Nazi crew in their hunt for the Ark. When Marion is captured, Tote is brought in to interrogate her. His methods, though clearly terrifying, yield no useful results. He even brandishes a metal device for intimidation, only for it to unfold into a coat hanger. His failure in interrogation leads to more drastic measures. After the Nazis discover the Well of Souls, Tote sadistically tosses Marion into the pit alongside Indiana, sealing them in and walking away with a creepy giggle that underscores his love for others' suffering. Tote's belief in the supernatural, or lack thereof, makes his eventual downfall even more ironic. While overseeing the Ark's delivery to Hitler, Tote accompanies the Nazis to a secluded island for the ceremonial opening. When the Ark appears to contain nothing but sand, Tote chuckles smugly, unimpressed by the artifact's supposed mysticism. But his smirk quickly vanishes as the Ark unleashes its true power. Ethereal spirits emerge, transforming into nightmarish entities. One grotesque, skull-faced apparition locks eyes with Tote, and the man who once relished fear now becomes its victim. The Ark's divine heat melts his face off, incinerating his remains along with his Nazi comrades. The sequence is unforgettable, and that's why his death is one of the most memorable in cinematic history. Ronald Lacey's portrayal of Tote elevates him from a standard villain to an indelible character. His eerie mannerisms and unsettling grin make him a unique antagonist, almost someone like Hans Gruber, although Tote is no way as intelligent as Gruber. Originally, Tote's death was intended to occur during the desert chase, but the melting face scene proved far more impactful. The effect, achieved using a wax and gelatin model of Lacey's head exposed to heat, remains a visual masterpiece of practical effects, often cited as a defining moment in the Indiana Jones franchise.
This is
Renee Bellik. Renee Emile Belloq, a French archaeologist with questionable morals, is as much a rival to Indiana Jones as he is an enigma. Born into a wealthy winemaking family in Marseille, Belloq enjoyed privilege from the start, with a family estate like Forteresse Malavel and a supposed connection to the infamous pirate Jean Lafitte, but his wealth and pedigree masked a ruthless streak. From his early days, Belloq's charm and cunning were matched only by his willingness to do whatever it took to rise to the top, even if it meant stepping on friends and colleagues. At the Sorbonne, Belloq met Indiana Jones, who was studying linguistics. Their professional rivalry began early when Belloq plagiarized Jones' academic work, winning the Archaeological Society prize. Jones couldn't prove the theft, and Belloq rode the wave of stolen success to land a position at the Louvre. But his time at the prestigious museum was short-lived. Funding a grave-robbing expedition in Persia that ended in death and disaster cost him his job. Fired and disgraced, Belloq embraced the shadowy side of archaeology and became a mercenary for hire. Belloq's career is a series of morally bankrupt adventures, whether exploiting indigenous tribes or dealing in black market relics. His methods prioritize profit over ethics. In Peru, he sought the temple of the Chachapoyan warriors, but failed to gain the trust of the Jovitos tribe. Later, he manipulated them to ambush Jones and steal a precious idol. His partnerships often reflected his opportunistic nature, including deals with Nazis and other unsavory groups when it suited him. Despite his cutthroat approach, Belloq possessed undeniable charisma. His interactions with Marion Ravenwood during the search for the Ark of the Covenant showcased his smooth-talking side. While the Nazis saw Marion as a tool, Belloq treated her with a strange mix of courtesy and something evil, even sharing a drink with her in a moment of uneasy camaraderie. Yet his charm was only surface deep. He was perfectly content to let Marion and Indy die when their usefulness ran out. Belloq's arrogance was his defining trait. He relished outmaneuvering Indiana Jones, often gloating when he snatched victory at the last moment. His belief in his own superiority was both his strength and his downfall. Aligning with the Nazis to locate the Ark, Belloq crafted a replica of a critical artifact based on incomplete information. This led to the Nazis digging in the wrong place, and when Indy uncovered the Ark first, Belloq swooped in to claim it. His overconfidence blinded him to the danger of meddling with powers beyond human understanding. The opening of the Ark on a secluded island was to be the end of Belloq's hubris. Dressed in ceremonial robes, he performed the ritual to reveal the Ark's contents. Much like Tote, he initially mocked the idea of divine wrath, and dismissed the artifact as nothing more than a box of dust and sand. But when the Ark unleashed its supernatural power, Belloq's curiosity turned to terror. A spirit transformed into a horrifying angel of death, and Belloq became a conduit for the Ark's holy fire. His final moments were a mix of awe and horror, before his head exploded in a fiery crescendo, obliterating him alongside his Nazi allies. Irina Spalko. Colonel Irina Spalko, a steely and ambitious Soviet officer, was a military scientist, sure, but she was also a complex cocktail of intellect, combat skills, and psychic curiosity. As Stalin's favorite Cold War operative, Spalko was tasked with uncovering artifacts that can have a paranormal edge in the global arms race. But beneath her sharp military exterior, she carried a personal obsession, understanding her own psychic abilities and the meaning of her existence. This mix of patriotism and personal quest made her both a formidable adversary as well as a tragic figure. Born with psychic powers, Spalko faced ostracization during her early years, which fueled her drive to discover why she was different. This thirst for answers became her defining trait. Though her abilities were unreliable, her knack for knowing things unnerved both allies and enemies. She could disarm others with startling insights into their secrets, earning her the nickname Witch among her own men. Her psychic edge, while not infallible, gave her an air of mystery that few dared to challenge. In the Soviet army, Spalko's skills made her invaluable. She excelled in martial arts and was a master fencer, and always wielded her rapier, a weapon as precise and deadly as she was. Her combat skills, combined with her cold, calculating nature, cemented her reputation as someone to be feared. She didn't just fight battles, she dominated them. Believing balance, not brute strength, was the key to victory. Spalko was the embodiment of discipline, but she wasn't above exploiting her gender to outmaneuver male opponents, proving she could weaponize anything, even a distracted glance. Additionally, her loyalty to the Soviet Union was unshakable. Spalko was no rogue agent. Every move she made was in service to her country, but her devotion wasn't free from selfish motives. While she claimed to act for the greater good, she harbored a deep personal longing to unravel the mysteries of her own mind and the world around her. This duality, public patriotism versus private ambition, made her a fascinating antagonist. Unlike villains driven purely by malice, Spalko's actions stem from an earnest, albeit warped, belief in her mission. Spalko's interaction with Indiana Jones revealed another layer to her character. She respected Jones' intellect, and even treated him as an equal, a rare courtesy from someone as cold as she was. Despite her admiration, she couldn't resist needling him, dismissing his pursuit of freedom and morality as small-minded. To her, Jones was a dog chasing scraps, a mere tool to achieve her goals. She envied his connection to the artifacts she craved, particularly the Crystal Skull, which seemed to reject her in favor of Jones. This jealousy only deepened her resolve and pushed her to the brink. Her belief in destiny and her obsession with the legend of Akator consumed her. Spalko saw the quest for the Crystal Skull as the culmination of her life's work, a chance to answer the existential questions that haunted her. She craved ultimate knowledge, but her arrogance blinded her to the dangers of wielding such power. When she demanded everything from Akator's hive mind, it granted her wish in the cruelest way possible, and disintegrated her in a fiery display of cosmic irony. She got exactly what she wanted, just not in the way she expected. Spalko's men feared and respected her in equal measure. Her authority was absolute, enough to even halt the brutish Dochenko in his traps. Yet for all her power and discipline, she shared a fatal flaw with past antagonists like Renee Bellik, an inability to see beyond her own hubris. Walter Donovan. Walter Donovan is the textbook definition of a villain blinded by greed and hubris. A wealthy American industrialist with a taste for antiquities. Apart from the love of history, he had his sights set on the Holy Grail, not for its spiritual significance, but for the immortality it promised. His pursuit of the Grail led him to a dangerous alliance with the Nazis, which made him a man willing to stoop to any level to achieve his ambitions. Donovan's wealth and charm painted a convincing facade of sophistication. Living in a lavish Fifth Avenue apartment, he maintained an image of a polished philanthropist, contributing generously to the National Museum of History. But beneath that veneer was a cunning manipulator with little regard for human life. When his miners unearthed a stone tablet in Turkey hinting at the Grail's location, Donovan embarked on a deadly quest to claim it, enlisting the help of the Nazis and the duplicitous Dr. Elsa Schneider. What makes Donovan particularly evil is his ability to disguise his true nature. Initially, he approaches Indiana Jones with a feigned politeness and intellectual curiosity, but his calm demeanor masks a ruthless determination. He views people, even allies, as pawns in his game. This is especially evident in his treatment of Elsa and the Jones family. For Donovan, loyalty is a tool, discarded the moment it ceases to be useful. Donovan's obsession with the Grail isn't purely about power, though that's a significant part of it. His fascination with immortality reveals a deeper fear of mortality and an almost desperate desire to transcend it. This desperation drives him to make reckless decisions, including trusting Elsa to choose the Grail. His arrogance blinds him to her ulterior motives and his own lack of understanding about the artifact he covets. When Donovan finally reaches the Grail Temple, he faces a test of wisdom he's woefully unprepared for. Despite his wealth and influence, he lacks the humility to see the Grail for what it truly is. Convinced by Elsa to select an ornate, jewel-encrusted cup, Donovan drinks from it, believing he has secured eternal life. Instead, his body rapidly decays in a horrifying sequence that reflects his greed consuming him. Literally. Within moments, he transforms from a smug industrialist to a crumbling skeleton, leaving nothing behind but dust and a Nazi pin. A grim reminder of his misplaced loyalties. Donovan's death is a masterstroke in cinematic villainy, not just for its grotesque imagery, but for its moral undertones. Industrial Light and Magic special effects brought his death to life in horrifying detail, with a combination of puppetry, practical effects, and computer animation.
To what? The poison you just drank.
Lao Che, Shanghai's infamous underworld kingpin, ruled with a mix of sharp intellect, ruthless tactics, and enough charisma to mask his darker pursuits. Born in 1885, as a descendant of the Manchu dynasty's first emperor, Nurhaci, Lao climbed from petty thief to crime lord, cementing his power through opium, human trafficking, and an intricate web of legitimate businesses that served as fronts for his operations. By the time he established himself, Lao was the kind of merchant prince who traded in both fine goods and human misery, though his real title was more accurately gang lord. Lao's public image as a wealthy businessman masked his seedy dealings. His legitimate ventures included export companies and high-end nightclubs, like the lavish club Obi-Wan, which doubled as his base of operations. The club offered fine dining and entertainment to Shanghai's elite, while catering to more illicit desires: gambling, prostitution, and other underworld activities. Lao didn't just bribe public officials, he blackmailed many, making them puppets in his sprawling empire. He cultivated an air of untouchable sophistication, but those in the know saw him for what he truly was, a crime boss with a flair for theatrics. Family was a complicated affair for Lao. He had 3 sons by different women, but only Cao Can earned his favor, while Chun often found himself ignored. Both served as lieutenants in Lao's criminal operations, though Cao Can's loyalty was matched by his willingness to carry out his father's orders, no matter how brutal. Lao's use of cremated remains as collateral for loans reflected his cold pragmatism and flair for the macabre. This practice even extended to his collection of rare and royal ashes, blending businesses with his unique brand of cultural appreciation. Lao Che's manipulative nature extended beyond Shanghai. His dealings with Indiana Jones were as much about power plays as they were about treasure. Though he relied on Indy's skills to recover rare artifacts like Nurhaci's ashes, Lao never hesitated to double-cross him. The poison drink trick he pulled during their exchange at Club Obi-Wan was classic Lao, elegant in execution, ruthless in intent. His confidence in having the upper hand often bordered on arrogance, but he backed it up with a network of enforcers and connections that made defying him a perilous game. Despite his cold and calculating demeanor, Lao had a dark sense of humor. When Indy escaped with both the antidote and Lao's singer Willie Scott, Lao didn't explode in fury. Instead, he played the long game, arranging for a pilot from his airline to sabotage Indy's escape. Lao's ability to maintain composure, even when outmaneuvered, made him a dangerous adversary. He never relied solely on brute force. His mind was his greatest weapon, allowing him to adapt and strike back when his enemies least expected it. Antonin Dochenko. Antonin Dochenko was physically imposing, ruthlessly loyal, and not too burdened by overthinking. A Soviet colonel during the Cold War, Dochenko was the personification of brute force over intellect, often solving problems with his fist rather than his mind. His giant physique and no-nonsense demeanor made him a natural enforcer for Irina Spalko's ambitious and dangerous plans. Dochenko's loyalty to the Soviet cause defined his character. He was the type of soldier who didn't question orders, no matter how questionable or deadly. From leading covert missions to infiltrating the Nevada military base at Hangar 51, to enduring sweltering jungles in pursuit of Akator, Dochenko was a man who did what needed to be done without complaint, except when it came to the desert heat, which even he couldn't endure without grumbling. His dogged determination to follow through on orders, however, often came at the expense of his own well-being. Physically, Dochenko was a juggernaut. His sheer strength and combat skills made him a match for Indiana Jones in hand-to-hand brawls. Unlike Spalko, who relied on intellect and manipulation, Dochenko thrived in direct confrontation. He approached every fight with brute force, whether it was grappling with Jones in a rocket sled chamber, or hurling himself into a super colony of killer ants to settle the score. His preference for physical dominance often worked to his advantage, though it also exposed his recklessness. Dochenko's personality was pretty straightforward. He had little use for nuance or subtlety, often resorting to intimidation and violence to achieve his goals. He wasn't a villain with grand philosophical motives or complex schemes. He was a soldier doing his job, albeit with a side of personal vendettas. His disdain for Jones grew after their repeated encounters, especially after being outsmarted and knocked unconscious multiple times. That disdain drove him to leap into danger without thinking of the consequences, which ultimately led to his gruesome end. Despite his stoic exterior, Dochenko wasn't immune to fear. His horrifying death scene, where he was devoured alive by a swarm of Siafu ants, remains one of the franchise's most disturbing moments. His scream for help in Russian, "Pomogimne," which translates to "help me" in English, was a rare moment of vulnerability. Much like his predecessors, who were undone by their greed or hubris, Dochenko's downfall came from his relentless pursuit of vengeance. His decision to abandon the relative safety of his truck to fight Jones at the ant colony was pure recklessness. That choice cost him his life in one of the most brutal ways imaginable, cementing his place as one of the franchise's most memorable antagonists. Igor Dzhidzhikine's portrayal of Dochenko added depth to a character that could have easily been one-dimensional. Dzhidzhikine's real-life background as a Soviet Special Forces soldier lent authenticity to the role, while his physicality and commanding presence made Dochenko a formidable foe. Ernst Vogel. As a high-ranking officer in the German military, Colonel Ernst Vogel is not driven by personal greed for the Holy Grail, but by his unwavering dedication to executing orders. His focus is on achieving Hitler's objectives, which makes him a cold and efficient antagonist. Vogel's personality is a cocktail of ruthlessness, violence, and arrogance. He's quick to anger, especially when taunted, and his short fuse often leads to violent outbursts. Despite this, he remains calculating, using intimidation and force to get what he wants. His hatred for Indiana Jones and Henry Jones Sr. seems almost personal, as he goes to extraordinary lengths to capture and kill them. This animosity fuels much of his aggressive behavior throughout their encounters. As a staunch believer in Nazi and Aryan ideology, Vogel embodies the regime's authoritarian cruelty. He views his targets not as individuals, but as obstacles to be crushed. This cold detachment is evident when he uses hostages and violence as tools to achieve his goals. His lack of interest in the Grail itself highlights his role as a soldier following orders rather than a treasure seeker. Vogel cares more about fulfilling his mission for the Führer than about the mystical properties of the artifact. Physically imposing and militarily disciplined, Vogel is a formidable opponent for Indiana Jones. He relies on sheer strength and tactical prowess in combat, as seen in his relentless pursuit of the Joneses. His combat style reflects his personality, direct, aggressive, and without finesse. He prefers brute force over strategy, which makes him dangerous in a fight, but also predictable. This reliance on physical power ultimately becomes his downfall, as his obsession with defeating Indy leads him into situations he cannot control. Vogel's confrontations with Indiana are marked by his overconfidence, whether it's holding Elsa Schneider at gunpoint to manipulate Indy, or engaging in a brutal fight aboard a tank. Vogel consistently underestimates his adversary. His arrogance blinds him to Indiana's resourcefulness, allowing the archaeologist to turn the tables repeatedly. Vogel's inability to adapt or think beyond orders underscores his role as a tool of the Nazi regime, rather than an independent villain. His death is both dramatic and fitting, as the culmination of his violent tendencies and over-reliance on physical dominance. In his final moments, Vogel's determination to kill Indiana leads him to a reckless fight on a tank, hurtling toward a cliff. His death, falling to his death as the tank crashes into the canyon, mirrors his earlier defeat when Indy shoved him out of a Zeppelin. This recurring motif of falling highlights Vogel's failure to rise above his brute force approach. He's less a nuanced villain and more a physical embodiment of the oppressive Nazi war machine. His interactions with the Joneses, filled with violence and intimidation, emphasize his function as a symbol of the regime's ruthlessness. Vogel is not a man of complex emotions. He's a soldier who exists to enforce Hitler's will, and his unflinching loyalty to his orders makes him a dangerous and memorable antagonist. Clobber. Clobber, a brash and violent American neo-Nazi, serves as a key enforcer of Dr. Jurgen Valer's twisted plot to alter history in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. While Valer operates with an unsettling mix of intellect and delusion, Clobber's approach is far simpler: intimidation, brute force, and an itchy trigger finger. His chaotic and unpredictable nature adds a volatile layer to the group, making him a dangerous figure in his own right. Clobber embodies the reckless brutality of someone utterly devoted to a warped cause. Unlike Valer, who cloaks his ambitions in calculated plans, Clobber wears his hatred and aggression on his sleeve. His willingness to kill without hesitation, even in broad daylight, sets him apart as someone driven by both ideological zeal and a raw appetite for violence. When obstacles arise, his first instinct is to reach for his gun, often with catastrophic results. Despite his thuggish demeanor, Clobber isn't just a mindless brute. He displays cunning and loyalty in carrying out Valer's commands, though his loyalty seems born more of shared ideology than any deep personal connection. This devotion, however, frequently tips into blind fanaticism. He thrives on chaos, evident in his willingness to fire into a parade crowd, or his trigger-happy behavior during the hunt for the Antikythera. His lack of restraint often exacerbates the group's problems, though he remains an unrelenting force against Indiana Jones and Helena Shaw. Clobber's disdain for human life is apparent in nearly every encounter. He kills indiscriminately, viewing both enemies and bystanders as disposable. His murders of CIA agents and ship crew members underscore his complete disregard for any semblance of morality. Even Agent Mason, his supposed ally, is not spared. His cold execution of her demonstrates not only his willingness to betray, but also his twisted belief in the supremacy of his mission. One of Clobber's most defining traits is his unhinged thirst for violence. This becomes disturbingly evident during the climactic scene in ancient Syracuse, where he descends into madness, firing indiscriminately at the Roman and Syracusan forces. He exemplifies the sheer chaos and destruction he brings wherever he goes. His actions not only expose his instability, but also draw attention to Valer's flawed reliance on such an erratic subordinate. Clobber's downfall is a direct result of his unchecked aggression. His chaotic shooting from Valer's plane invites retaliation from the ancient armies, ultimately leading to their fiery death. His inability to think beyond immediate violence becomes his undoing, marking him as a character driven by impulses rather than strategy. It's a fitting end for someone whose life revolved around destruction. Jurgen Valer. Dr. Jurgen Valer, a former Nazi scientist turned NASA engineer, under the guise of Professor Schmidt, serves as the central antagonist in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Valer is not merely a relic of Germany's dark past, he embodies the arrogance and ambition that fueled the Nazi regime. His character is defined by his intellect, obsessive nationalism, and delusional belief in his own superiority. Valer's brilliance as a mathematician and astrophysicist make him a formidable villain. His scientific acumen played a significant role in the Apollo program's success, positioning him as a key figure in America's race to the moon. Yet beneath his contributions to space exploration lies an undying loyalty to Nazi ideology. Valer's goal is chillingly ambitious, to rewrite history by using Archimedes' dial to travel back to 1939, and install himself as the new Führer. His plan hinges on the belief that he alone has the intellect to lead Germany to global dominance, untainted by what he views as Hitler's military incompetence. Valer's ego is both his greatest strength and his fatal flaw. His confidence and his intellect, and his ability to manipulate others, is evident in his every action. From his role in the space program to his calculated pursuit of the dial, he exudes a sense of control and superiority. However, the same arrogance blinds him to the limitations of his plan. He assumes the infallibility of his calculations, dismissing any possibility of error. This hubris ultimately seals his fate when his attempts to manipulate the dial leads him to the wrong time period. Valer's ruthlessness underscores his fanaticism. He views human life as expendable in service of his goals, whether it's ordering the execution of CIA agents or coldly murdering those who stand in his way. Valer acts without hesitation. His treatment of Agent Mason, whom he openly despises due to her race, exemplifies his unrepentant racism and disdain for anyone he deems inferior. Valer's willingness to kill indiscriminately, coupled with his ideological fervor, paints him as a man who has not moved beyond the atrocities of his past. Despite his outward composure, Valer is not immune to desperation. This becomes glaringly apparent during the climactic moments of this story. When his plan goes awry and his plane hurtles into ancient Syracuse, Valer clings to the belief that he can still salvage his mission. His refusal to accept failure, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, highlight his inability to confront his own limitations. As Roman ballistae fire upon his plane, Valer's delusions crumble, leaving him powerless to escape his self-created doom. Mads Mikkelsen's portrayal of Valer adds depth to the character. His performance captures both the cold precision of a scientist and the seething fanaticism of a true believer. Valer's calm demeanor and calculated speech mask the unrelenting hatred and ambition that drive him. This duality makes him a chilling antagonist, one who feels all too plausible given his roots in historical figures, like Werner von Braun. Valer's death is as dramatic as his ambitions. His plane, misdirected by Archimedes' miscalculations of continental drift, becomes a fiery wreck in ancient Syracuse. The crash not only marks the end of Valer's twisted plans, but also leaves his legacy in ruins. His watch, scavenged by Archimedes, becomes a relic of his failure, a grim reminder of the dangers of hubris and unchecked ambition. Elsa Schneider. Dr. Elsa Schneider, the Austrian art historian and secondary antagonist of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, is a complex and morally ambiguous character. Unlike the clear-cut villains in the franchise, Elsa operates in a gray area between ambition and betrayal. Her charm, intellect, and conflicted motivations make her both fascinating and dangerous. Elsa's pursuit of the Holy Grail defines her character. She's driven by a mix of academic curiosity and personal ambition, making her an opportunist, willing to align herself with the Nazis to achieve her goals. While she does not share their ideology, her willingness to work with them reveals her moral compromises. For Elsa, the Grail represents power and prestige, not faith or nationalism. This pragmatic but self-serving approach underscores her lack of loyalty to any cause beyond her own aspirations. Her interactions with Indiana Jones showcase her manipulative nature. Elsa uses her intelligence to charm and gain trust, presenting herself as an ally before revealing her true allegiances. She plays a dangerous game, seducing both Indiana and his father, exploiting their emotions to further her objectives. Yet there are moments where her emotions seem genuine, adding layers to her character. Her tears during the Nazi book burning and her apparent discomfort with Walter Donovan's ruthlessness suggest a conscience buried beneath her ambitions. Elsa's ability to navigate treacherous situations is matched by her cunning. She knows how to manipulate those around her, whether it's Donovan, the Joneses, or the Nazis. However, her manipulative streak is not without flaws. Her decision to deliberately choose the wrong Grail for Donovan demonstrates her recklessness. While it ensures her control over the situation, it also leads to horrifying consequences when Donovan's hubris seals his fate. Elsa's reaction to his death shows genuine fear and perhaps regret, hinting at the limits of her cold pragmatism. Despite her intelligence, Elsa's greed and inexperience prove to be her undoing. Her obsession with the Grail blinds her to the risks involved, both physical and moral. When the temple begins to collapse after Indiana retrieves the true Grail, Elsa's decision to cross the seal and seize the artifact becomes her fatal mistake. Her refusal to heed Indiana's warnings, driven by a desperate need to claim the Grail, highlights her inability to prioritize survival over ambition. Her fall into the chasm, clutching the Grail she can never possess, serves as a poignant reminder of the cost of unchecked greed. Elsa's character contrasts sharply with other women in Indiana Jones's life, such as Marion Ravenwood and Willie Scott. While they exhibit loyalty and courage, Elsa's motivations are far more self-centered. She's neither a simple ally nor an outright villain, but a deeply flawed individual whose choices lead to her tragic downfall. Her sophistication and conflicted nature make her stand out among the franchise's antagonists. Alison Doty's performance as Elsa adds depth to the character, balancing her icy determination with moments of vulnerability. Empire's assessment of Elsa as a sympathetic Nazi sympathizer captures the paradox of her character. She's an antagonist you can despise for her actions, yet feel a twinge of pity for as her ambition destroys her. Hermann Dietrich. Entrusted with the task of retrieving the Ark of the Covenant for Adolf Hitler, Dietrich operates with an iron will and unwavering focus on his mission. He's a man whose loyalty to the Führer surpasses personal interests or moral considerations, making him a cold and calculating antagonist. Dietrich's role as the commander of the Tanis excavation highlights his militaristic approach to archaeology. He treats the search for the Ark not as a scholarly endeavor, but as a military operation. His collaboration with Renee Bellik, though necessary, is strained by his disdain for the French archaeologist's independent nature. Dietrich views Belloq as a tool rather than an equal, tolerating his input only as long as it serves the Nazi cause. This dynamic creates tension, with Belloq's more intellectual perspective clashing with Dietrich's unyielding focus on fulfilling Hitler's demands. Dietrich's interactions with his subordinates reveal his authoritarian demeanor. He holds a dismissive attitude toward Major Tote, despite the Gestapo agent's contributions. When Belloq chastises him for sending premature reports to Berlin, Dietrich coldly deflects, citing Hitler's demand for constant updates. This moment underscores his rigid adherence to protocol, even at the expense of strategic prudence. Dietrich's lack of flexibility becomes a recurring flaw, as he underestimates the resourcefulness of Indiana Jones and the significance of the Ark's mystical properties. Dietrich's unwavering commitment to the mission often leads him to make ruthless decisions. He orders the torture of Marion Ravenwood without hesitation, despite Belloq's objections. For Dietrich, Marion is expendable, her value only tied to the information she might provide. When she proves unhelpful, he has no qualms about throwing her into the Well of Souls alongside Jones, prioritizing the Ark's retrieval over any personal concerns. His actions reflect his disdain for anything outside his immediate objectives, including human life. Despite his calculated demeanor, Dietrich's downfall is tied to his arrogance and ignorance of the Ark's true power. He dismisses the necessity of Belloq's Jewish ritual, viewing it as an unnecessary formality. This skepticism illustrates his ideological disdain for Jewish culture, further emphasizing his Nazi identity. However, his decision to proceed with the ritual, albeit begrudgingly, marks a critical turning point. It demonstrates his desperation to ensure the Ark is not empty, a rare crack in his otherwise composed exterior. Dietrich's death is as dramatic as it is fitting. When the Ark's supernatural forces are unleashed, his initial skepticism gives way to terror. The transformation of the spirits into horrifying entities paralyzes him, stripping away his confidence. The Ark's power mummifies him in an instant, collapsing his skull and reducing him to ash. His death, like those of his fellow Nazis, is a direct consequence of their hubris and misuse of sacred relics. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.